The first sound was the crack of bone against marble. It echoed through the atrium like a gunshot. People froze mid-step. A woman screamed. A security badge skidded across the floor and spun to a stop at the edge of the fountain. The man on the ground did not move. Blood crept from beneath his temple, thin and dark, spreading toward the polished white stone, as if the building itself were bleeding. And standing 3 feet away, gripping a yellow caution cone with both hands, was a woman no one in that building could have named 5 minutes earlier. Her breath came shallow. Her shoulders were squared, but only just. Her eyes were locked on the fallen executive, not with panic, not with triumph, but with something far more dangerous: recognition. Because she knew exactly who he was, and she knew exactly what this moment was about to cost. The building was Hartwell Plaza, downtown Chicago. 42 floors of steel, glass, and money. The kind of place where the air smelled faintly of espresso and entitlement, where voices stayed low and confident, where mistakes were buried quietly and quickly. At 5 every morning, before the first elevator chimed, before the first suit stepped through the revolving doors, Rachel Adams arrived through the service entrance on LaSalle Street. She was 32. Slim. Unremarkable at a glance. Brown hair pulled tight into a bun that never loosened. No makeup, no jewelry. Her uniform was always clean pressed, sharp enough to crease skin. Rachel cleaned executive floors. Not because she asked to, because she was assigned there. She knew the rhythms of the building better than the people who owned it. Which lights flickered, which doors stuck, which offices stayed dark too late at night, which assistants cried in the restrooms, and which executives raised their voices when they thought no one was listening. She learned early how to move without sound, how to exist without friction, how to be invisible without being careless. That morning had started like any other. The sky still black, the wind cutting down the avenue, her coffee bitter and too hot. She had just finished mopping the west corridor when the elevator doors opened behind her. The man who stepped out wore a charcoal suit and an expression carved from authority. Silver hair, perfect posture, shoes polished to a mirror. Elliot Vaughn, Chief Operations Officer of Vaughn Hale Systems, 61 years old. Known for firing people without raising his voice. He didn't see Rachel. He never did. He was already speaking phone pressed to his ear, words sharp and clipped. Deadlines. Liability. Someone had failed him. Someone always did. Rachel bent to place the caution cone. Her foot slipped. The cone hit the floor. Elliot Vaughn took 1 step too many. The fall was fast, awkward, final. Now the atrium was chaos. Security rushed in. Phones were raised, then shoved back into pockets by guards who barked orders with rehearsed calm. A crowd formed, then tightened, then was pushed away. Rachel stood exactly where she was. A security officer approached her. Mid-40s, square jaw. Kind eyes, trying to stay professional. "Mom," he said not unkindly, "I need you to step back." She nodded, moved. Her hands trembled just slightly. Someone else had noticed that too. From the mezzanine above, watching through the glass railing, Daniel Mercer did not move. Daniel was 40, CEO of Vaughn Hale Systems, founder, majority shareholder. The man whose name was etched into the building's facade. He had arrived early that morning, unusually early, his mind already grinding through a decision that would alter the company's future and ruin several powerful men, including the one now bleeding on the marble floor. Daniel's face was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on Rachel Adams, not with suspicion, with calculation. Because she had looked at Elliot Vaughn the way people look at something they already understand. Not like a victim, Not like an accident, like a consequence. 2 hours earlier, Rachel had been scrubbing a stain outside conference room B when the voices inside sharpened. She hadn't meant to listen. She never did. But walls were thin, and men like Elliot Vaughn never whispered. She won't last the quarter, Vaughn said. Medical leave, caregiver excuses. Well, frame it as performance. Clean, legal. Another voice replied, younger, nervous, and the audit Vaughn laughed. A dry sound. Handled. Always is. Rachel kept her eyes on the floor, her hands steady on the rag, her heartbeat loud in her ears. They were talking about her. She knew because no one else on that floor had taken 3 unpaid days off that month to sit beside a hospital bed while a machine breathed for her father. She had told HR. HR had nodded. Vaughn had signed off. Or so she thought. Rachel had gone home that night and stared at the ceiling of her studio apartment until dawn, replaying every shift, every missed spot, every second she had dared to believe she was safe. She wasn't safe. She never had been. And Elliot Vaughn knew it. Back in the atrium, paramedics arrived. The crowd thinned. The blood was cleaned with brutal efficiency. Daniel Mercer descended the stairs. People parted for him instinctively. Heads lowered, voices dropped. The building recalibrated around his presence. He stopped in front of Rachel. She looked up. For the first time since she started working there, someone at his level actually looked at her, not through her. At her. What did you see? Daniel asked. It was not a question meant to be answered lightly. Rachel swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was calm, flat, controlled. He was on the phone, she said, arguing. He didn't look down. Daniel studied her face, the lack of fear, the restraint. And before that, he said quietly. Rachel hesitated. Just long enough. Then she said, before that, I heard him discussing a termination that violates company policy and federal labor law. A breath caught somewhere behind them. The security officer stiffened. Daniel's gaze sharpened something cold and precise, locking into place. You're certain, he said. Yes. Why didn't you report it? Rachel met his eyes. Her voice did not waver. Because people like him don't fall unless they're already leaning. Silence spread outward, heavy and charged. Daniel straightened. In that moment, Rachel Adams was no longer invisible, and everyone standing within earshot felt the shift even if they couldn't yet name it. This was no longer an accident. This was the opening move of something much larger. And somewhere deep in the buildings, steel bones, the illusion of control began to crack. The building did not sleep that night, even after the marble was scrubbed and the blood was gone. Hartwell Plaza breathed differently in the dark. Elevators hummed without passengers. Lights burned in offices that were supposed to be empty. Security radios crackled with low voices that stopped whenever someone walked past. Rachel Adams clocked out at 6:20 in the evening and stood in the locker room longer than usual, her hands resting on the cold metal bench, her pulse still too loud in her ears. The fall kept replaying in fragments. The sound, the sudden weight of silence. The way Daniel Mercer's eyes had not left her face. People like him didn't look twice at people like her. Not unless something had already gone wrong. She changed slowly, folded her uniform with care, slipped it into her bag. When she stepped outside, the city air hit her hard, damp, and metallic sirens, threading the distance, like a warning she couldn't translate yet. Her phone vibrated, unknown number. She stared at it for a full second before answering. Rachel. This is Daniel Mercer, the voice said, calm. Measured, no introduction needed. I need you back here. Now. Her first instinct was refusal. Her second was fear. The third was something colder and more dangerous. Why, she asked. A pause. Not long. Just enough to be deliberate. Because the man who just left this building in an ambulance signed documents this afternoon that should not exist. And because you were the only person in earshot who didn't pretend not to hear. Rachel closed her eyes. Across the street, traffic lights blinked from red to green to red again, uncaring. I'm off the clock, I know, Daniel said. You'll be paid. That's not what I meant. Another pause, this one heavier. Come back anyway. She did. The executive floor felt different at night. Too quiet, too exposed. The carpet swallowed sound. The walls reflected faces back at themselves. Rachel followed an assistant she had never seen before, a woman in her early 40s with sharp glasses and a jaw set like stone. Phones stay outside, the assistant said, holding out a tray. Rachel placed hers down. The woman didn't look at her, just nodded and opened the door. The room beyond was smaller than Rachel expected. No grand table, no skyline view. Just a long desk, 2 chairs, and a screen glowing faintly on the wall. Daniel Mercer stood when she entered. Up close, he looked older than she had thought. Not in years, in weight. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes carried something tired beneath the control. Sit, he said. She did. On the screen behind him, a document appeared. Names, dates, numbers converted into words, not symbols. Severance language, compliance clauses. The kind of paperwork Rachel had learned to recognize without ever being allowed to touch. This was filed at 4:42 in the afternoon, Daniel said. It authorizes a performance termination, effective immediately, for an employee in custodial operations. Rachel's mouth went dry. My name isn't on that, she said. Daniel turned the screen slightly. It was. Rachel Adams, 32, at will, cause cited repeated procedural failure. She leaned forward, eyes scanning. That's not my signature. I know. Then how Elliot Vaughn had signing authority. He used it. The room tightened. Rachel felt something shift under her ribs, a pressure she recognized from hospital corridors and late-night phone calls, the feeling that came right before things fell apart. There's more, Daniel said. The screen changed again. A second document. Internal audit notes. Red flags, highlighted in yellow. These were buried, he continued. Delayed, softened, redirected. Every time a complaint came up that touched operations, it died somewhere between HR and legal. Rachel laughed, once sharp and humorless. You're telling me your company eats its own. Daniel didn't flinch. I'm telling you, it learned how long before I did. Silence stretched. Rachel thought of the voices she'd overheard. The casual certainty. The way Elliot Vaughn had said her name like a footnote. Why me? She asked finally. Daniel met her gaze. Because you heard something and didn't look away. And because the timing of that fall created a vacuum. A vacuum, she repeated. Someone almost died. Yes, Daniel said. And someone tried to end your livelihood in the same hour. Both matter. Rachel leaned back. Her fingers curled into the chair's edge. You want a witness. I want the truth, Daniel said. And I want it before the board convenes tomorrow at 9 a.m. Her breath caught. Tomorrow. They already know Elliot is hospitalized. They don't yet know what he signed. And when they do, Rachel said slowly, they'll look for someone small enough to crush. Daniel nodded once. They always do. She studied him then, really studied him. The controlled posture, the precise language, the way he positioned himself between her and the screen without seeming to. You're not offering protection, she said. No, he replied. I'm offering leverage. Rachel stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the carpet, loud in the quiet room. My father's dialysis is scheduled 3 times a week, she said. If I lose my insurance, he won't last 6 months. Daniel did not interrupt. If I speak, she continued, they'll come for me. Maybe not directly, but it'll happen. Daniel folded his hands. If you don't speak, they'll do it anyway. Just slower. The words landed heavy, honest, unforgiving. Rachel turned toward the door. Stopped. You could have let this disappear, she said. No one would have blamed you. I know, Daniel said. Why didn't you? For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not guilt, not pride. Something closer to recognition. Because I built this place on the idea that systems correct themselves, he said. And today I watched a system almost kill a man and quietly erase a woman in the same breath. Rachel faced him again. And now, Daniel said, I'm choosing which failure to own. The room went still. Rachel exhaled, long, slow, like she was bracing against a wave she could no longer avoid. I heard more than that one conversation, she said. Daniel straightened. Names, she continued. Dates, shortcuts, a pattern. Tell me, not yet. His eyes narrowed, just a fraction. You want terms, he said. I want time, Rachel replied. And I want access, not to feel powerful, to survive. Daniel considered her. The janitor who had just drawn a boundary in his office. The woman his company had tried to erase. 24 hours, he said. You get my legal counsel and my security team. After that, everything breaks. Rachel nodded. That's enough. As she turned to leave, Daniel spoke again. Rachel, she stopped. They will underestimate you, he said. Use that. Her mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile. I've been training for that my whole life. When she stepped back into the night, the city felt louder, sharper, like it knew something was coming. Above her, 42 floors of glass reflected a woman who was no longer invisible and a system that had just learned it picked the wrong person to silence. By 6:30 the next morning, the city was already awake, but Hartwell Plaza felt like it was holding its breath. Rachel Adams stood across the street with a paper cup of coffee. She had no intention of finishing watching the building the way someone watches a courtroom before a verdict. Glass reflecting gray sky. Flags stiff in the wind. Security guards rotating at the doors with an edge she hadn't seen before. She crossed when the light changed. Inside, everything looked normal. That was the problem. The same polished floors. The same curated calm. The same quiet understanding that whatever happened here would be decided far above most people's heads. Daniel Mercer's security team met her at the service corridor instead of the lobby. 2 men, 1 woman, no names offered. Their movements were efficient, practiced, not unkind. She noticed how they watched the cameras more than the people. They led her to a conference room on the 39th floor. No windows. Soundproofed walls, a table with 3 chairs, a speakerphone already glowing. Daniel was already there, jacket off sleeves, rolled eyes sharp, with the kind of focus that didn't come from caffeine. Across from him sat a woman in her late 50s, with steel gray hair, pulled back tight, and a legal pad already filled with notes. This is Margaret Collins, Daniel said. General Counsel. Margaret didn't smile. She studied Rachel like a problem that had to be solved without breaking the equation. You understand what you're walking into, she said. Rachel set her bag down. I understand. I don't have the luxury of misunderstanding it. A corner of Margaret's mouth twitched. Approval, maybe. Or respect. Hard to tell with people like her. Daniel tapped the table once. You said you heard more. Rachel nodded. Not by accident. Not once. Margaret leaned forward. Be precise. Rachel closed her eyes for a second, organizing memory, the way she had learned to do during long hospital nights. It started months ago. Conversations that didn't stop when I entered rooms. Not loud, careless. They assumed no one like me mattered. Daniel didn't interrupt. Elliot Vaughn wasn't acting alone. Rachel continued. He had cover, operations, compliance. A loop that fed itself. Complaints redirected, audits delayed. Certain employees marked as liabilities. Margaret's pen moved faster. Rachel opened her bag and took out a folded notebook, the pages soft from use. She placed it on the table, but didn't open it yet. I wrote things down, dates, phrases, names, not because I thought I'd use them, because I needed proof I wasn't imagining it. Daniel's gaze fixed on the notebook. Before you ask, Rachel, said I didn't record anything. I know the law. Illinois is two-party consent. I didn't break it. Margaret nodded once. Good. Rachel opened the notebook. The handwriting was neat, controlled, not frantic, the kind that came from repetition and discipline. 2 weeks ago. Executive washroom. Vaughn said, if she pushes again, bury it in performance. She won't survive arbitration. He wasn't talking about me that time. He was talking about a senior analyst, female, mid-40s, breast cancer. The room cooled. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Name. Rachel gave it. Margaret underlined something hard enough to dent the paper. And last Friday, Rachel continued there was a call. Vaughn and someone from IT governance. They joked about how long it took auditors to catch up when data was scrubbed early. Scrubbed, Daniel repeated. Rachel nodded. That's the word he used. Like it was nothing. Silence pressed in. The speakerphone buzzed. A low chime. Daniel pressed a button. Yes. A voice filled the room, male-controlled, too calm. Board members are arriving early. There's concern about messaging. Daniel's jaw tightened. Delay them. That will raise flags. Daniel leaned back, eyes never leaving Rachel. Everything about today raises flags. Buy me an hour. The line went dead. Margaret closed her notebook. What you're describing isn't just misconduct. It's pattern behavior, retaliation, obstruction. Rachel's fingers curled slightly. I know. Daniel stood. He paced once, then stopped behind Rachel's chair, close enough that she could feel the presence without being touched. They will say, you're unreliable, he said quietly. Emotional. Motivated by personal hardship. Rachel didn't turn. My father's condition doesn't make me stupid. I know, Daniel said. But they'll try. Margaret added, they'll also try to isolate you. Offer settlements. Threaten counterclaims. Rachel finally looked up. I'm not here to be saved. Daniel met her gaze. Then tell me what you want. Rachel took a breath. This was the moment, the pivot she had rehearsed in her head all night. I want temporary reassignment, out of custodial operations, somewhere visible, somewhere they can't quietly erase me. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That will look like favoritism. Rachel shook her head. No, it'll look like risk management. You put me somewhere with oversight, badges, cameras, witnesses. Daniel considered it. Security. Margaret frowned. She's not trained. Rachel spoke before Daniel could. I am. Both of them turned. I spent 8 years in logistics compliance before my father got sick, Rachel said. Midwest freight, hazard protocols, access controls. I didn't leave because I couldn't do the work. I left because the hours were killing him. Daniel's eyes sharpened. You didn't put that on your file. I wasn't asked. Margaret studied Rachel again, slower this time. Background check will confirm. It will. The room shifted. Not dramatically, subtly, like weight redistributing on a scale. Daniel nodded once. Temporary assignment. Security operations liaison. Effective immediately. Margaret scribbled. Ill draft it. The speakerphone chimed again. This time, Daniel let it ring longer before answering. Go ahead. A different voice now. Female. Tight. We have an issue. Someone from compliance has accessed archived audit logs without authorization. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Which someone? A pause. Laura Bennett. Rachel's spine went rigid. Daniel opened his eyes. She's early. Margaret's pen stilled. She's running. Rachel spoke calm but firm. She knows someone talked. Daniel looked at her. Do you know her? I've cleaned her office, Rachel said. She doesn't panic. She calculates. The door opened without a knock. A security officer stepped in, breath tight. Mr. Mercer. Ms. Bennett is requesting access to the boardroom. She says it's urgent. Daniel didn't hesitate. Escort her to Conference C. No devices. The officer nodded and vanished. Rachel stood. You should let me be there. Margaret's head snapped up. Absolutely not. Rachel met her gaze. She doesn't see me as a threat. That's an advantage. Daniel considered it for half a second. Then you observe. You don't speak. Rachel nodded. I know how to listen. As they moved down the hall, the building felt narrower, like the walls were leaning in. Voices echoed. Doors closed. Power shifted behind frosted glass. Conference C smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Laura Bennett sat at the table, back straight hands, folded eyes already sharp with assessment. She looked up as Rachel entered and frowned just slightly. Is she necessary? Laura asked, nodding toward Rachel. Daniel took his seat. Yes? Laura's gaze lingered on Rachel for a beat too long. Calculation flickered. Something else too. Recognition. Rachel kept her face neutral. Laura smiled thinly. Interesting morning, she said. Elliot's fall. Unfortunate. Daniel didn't respond. Laura leaned back. I assume this is about containment. Rachel watched Laura's fingers. No tremor. No rush. Controlled to the edge of arrogance. Daniel said, This is about accountability. Laura laughed softly. That's a dangerous word to use before coffee. Rachel inhaled. She smelled it then. Fear. Buried under polish. Tight and sharp. Laura glanced at Rachel again. I don't believe we've met. Rachel met her eyes. You've walked past me for 2 years. The silence that followed was not accidental. Daniel watched them both. And somewhere deep in Hartwell Plaza, something old and rotten began to realize it had been seen. Laura Bennett did not raise her voice when she spoke, which made every word sharper. You're implying misconduct, she said, fingers still folded, posture immaculate. That's a serious allegation. Daniel Mercer leaned back in his chair, one ankle resting over his knee, expression calm to the point of indifference. Am stating that archived audit logs were accessed without authorization at 6:12 this morning. Laura's smile did not falter. I oversee compliance. Access is my responsibility. Rachel stood near the wall, hands clasped behind her back eyes, lowered just enough to appear uninvolved. From this angle, she could see Laura's reflection in the glass screen, the way her jaw tightened on the right side, the way her left foot tapped once, then stopped. Daniel continued, You also signed off on a performance termination yesterday that was prepared without review. Laura tilted her head. In an emergency, discretion is allowed. An emergency, Daniel repeated, for a custodial employee. Laura's eyes flicked to Rachel and back. Procedural failures can expose us to risk at any level. Rachel felt the heat rise in her chest, controlled it, let it settle. This was not the moment. Daniel's voice remained even. What kind of risk? Laura exhaled softly, as if indulging him. Negligence claims, safety incidents. Daniel leaned forward, like a fall on wet marble. The air changed. Laura's smile thinned by a fraction. Are you suggesting causation? I am suggesting timing, Daniel said. And motive. Laura laughed once, a sound designed to signal disbelief without offense. This is absurd. Elliot's accident has everyone jumpy. Rachel noticed how Laura avoided saying his last name. Daniel glanced at Rachel. Just once. A question without words. Rachel stepped forward. I placed the cone, she said. Her voice was calm, steady. I always do. Laura turned fully now. I'm sorry, who are you? Rachel met her gaze. The person you tried to erase yesterday. Silence landed hard. Laura's eyes narrowed, then smoothed over again faster than most people could manage. This is highly inappropriate, Laura said. We're discussing executive matters. Daniel said, we're discussing truth. Laura's fingers finally moved. She uncrossed her hands, placed them flat on the table. Let's be clear, she said. A company this size cannot afford sentiment. We manage risk. We protect the whole by making difficult decisions. Rachel felt Daniel's presence beside her, now a quiet acknowledgement. Laura continued. People confuse proximity with importance. This woman overheard fragments and spun them into a narrative because she's frightened. That doesn't make it fact. Rachel didn't react. She had expected this. The reframing, the dismissal. What about the analyst? Rachel asked. The one undergoing chemotherapy. You redirected her complaint 3 times. Laura blinked. Just once. That is confidential. So is retaliation, Rachel said. Daniel watched closely. Answer the question. Laura leaned back. I managed exposure. That's my job. Rachel spoke again, voice low. You told Elliot she wouldn't survive arbitration. The words landed like glass. Laura's eyes locked onto Rachel's. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Anger flared. Then calculation snapped back into place. You should be very careful, Laura said. Making accusations without proof is dangerous. Rachel nodded. That's why I wrote everything down. Daniel's gaze sharpened. Show her. Rachel opened her bag and placed the notebook on the table, sliding it forward. Laura didn't touch it. Instead, she smiled. You think handwritten notes outweigh executive records? I think patterns outweigh excuses, Rachel said. Laura laughed softly. This is a company, not a morality play. Daniel stood. The chair scraped against the floor, a small, violent sound in the quiet room. This meeting is over. Laura's head snapped up. Excuse me. You're placed on administrative leave effective immediately, Daniel said. Security will escort you out. Laura stared at him. You can't do that unilaterally. I can, Daniel said, and I just did. For the first time, Laura's composure cracked. You're making a mistake, she said. You think you're cleansing rot, but you're destabilizing the entire structure. Daniel's voice was cold. The structure is already compromised. You just mistook silence for stability. Laura stood abruptly. This will not end well. Rachel watched her closely, the way she straightened her jacket, the way her eyes scanned the room, measuring exits' allies' angles. Laura stopped at the door and turned back, gaze pinning Rachel. You should have stayed invisible. Rachel held her stare. You should have stayed honest. The door closed. The silence that followed was different. Not tense, settled, heavy with consequence. Daniel exhaled slowly. That went faster than expected. Margaret Collins entered the room without ceremony, legal pad already in hand. She's contacting counsel. The board will fracture. Daniel nodded. Let it. Margaret looked at Rachel. You understand what you just did? Rachel met her gaze. I stopped pretending. Margaret studied her, then nodded once. Security assignment is official. Badge upgrade is processing. Daniel turned to Rachel. You should go home. Rachel shook her head. Not yet. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why? Because Laura wasn't the only one listening, Rachel said. And whoever else is involved will move now. Margaret frowned. You think there are more? Rachel nodded. I know there are. Daniel watched her for a long moment. Then he said, Walk me through it. Rachel took a breath. The audit delays weren't random. They followed a rhythm, always just long enough to push an issue past review cycles. That requires coordination. Margaret's pen moved. Names. Rachel hesitated, then spoke them. 3. All mid-level, all overlooked, all powerful in the way only unseen people could be. Daniel's jaw tightened. They'll destroy records. They already tried, Rachel said. Laura accessed the archives this morning to clean house. That means the others know time is short. Margaret looked up. We lock systems now. Daniel shook his head. Too obvious. Rachel spoke quietly. Let them think they're ahead. Daniel's eyes met hers. You're suggesting a trap. Rachel nodded. They assume no one is watching the watchers. Margaret studied Rachel with new interest. You're comfortable in the dark. Rachel didn't answer right away. She thought of hospital hallways at 3 a.m, of listening to machines breathe, of learning patience because panic never helped. I learned where people hide, she said, because I had to. Daniel straightened. Do it. Margaret hesitated. Daniel. He didn't look at her. She's right. Margaret closed her notebook. Then we document everything. Rachel nodded. And we don't move until they do. As Rachel stepped back into the corridor, the building felt louder, charged with motion beneath the surface. Phones rang behind closed doors. Elevators chimed out of sequence. Somewhere, someone realized the rules had changed. Rachel walked past offices she had cleaned for years, seeing them differently now. Not as places of power, but as rooms full of people afraid of being seen. Behind her, Daniel Mercer stood alone in Conference C, staring at the city through frosted glass, understanding at last that control was not about silence. It was about who dared to listen. And the quiet woman everyone underestimated had just turned the volume all the way up. By midday, the building felt hollowed out, like a body still moving after the heart had been struck. Rachel Adams moved through Hartwell Plaza with a new badge clipped to her collar. The color different, the access broader, the weight unmistakable. Heads turned. Conversations stalled. Doors closed a second too fast. The invisibility she had worn for years was gone, and in its absence came something sharper. Attention. She didn't rush. Rushing drew eyes. She walked the way she always had, steady, deliberate counting steps, listening to the way sound traveled through corridors. The hum of servers on 36, the echo near the west stairwell, the dead zone by the archival room where cameras blinked but didn't record. She felt the building thinking. At 12:15, Daniel Mercer stood in the Security Operations Center jacket, back on voice low, as he spoke to the head of internal security. Monitors lined the walls. Blueprints glowed. Data scrolled. They haven't shut down, Daniel said. They're probing. The security chief nodded. They're moving laterally, trying to see what we see. Daniel's eyes flicked to the feed labeled Archive Access. Empty. Quiet. Too quiet. They'll go after redundancy, Daniel said. People panic when they realize time isn't on their side. Rachel's voice came through his earpiece, calm and close. They won't panic. Not yet. Daniel turned slightly. Where are you? Second floor, finance wing, near the copy room. A pause. Why there? Because people forget paper still exists. Daniel's mouth tightened. Be careful. Rachel didn't respond. She didn't need to. Inside the finance wing, the air smelled faintly of toner and old carpet. Rachel slowed as she approached the copy room. The door was ajar. A man stood inside his back, to her feeding a stack of documents into a shredder. He was mid-40s, crisp shirt, no tie. The kind of employee no one questioned because he never made waves. Mark Ellison. Budget oversight. One of the names she had given earlier. Rachel stepped into the doorway. "You're early." Mark froze, just for a fraction of a second. Then he turned, smile already forming. "Rachel Wright. I heard about the promotion. Temporary assignment," she said. "What are you shredding?" Mark glanced at the machine. Old drafts. Nothing critical. Rachel tilted her head. "Funny. That model was retired last quarter." Mark laughed lightly. "I like the reliability." Rachel moved closer. She could see the top sheet before it disappeared. Vendor codes, redactions, handwritten initials. "Step away from the shredder," she said. Mark's smile faded. "You don't have authority here." Rachel raised her badge. "I do today." Mark's jaw tightened. "You're overreaching." Rachel's voice stayed even. "You accessed archived compliance files at 6:52 this morning." Mark's eyes flicked to the door. Rachel continued. "You printed them at 11:41. You started shredding at 12:10. Silence pressed in. Mark straightened. "You're making a lot of assumptions." Rachel nodded. "I am. And you're going to confirm them." Mark laughed again, louder this time. "You think Daniel Mercer is going to take the word of a former janitor over—" Rachel stepped forward, cutting him off. "Over a man trying to erase a paper trail." Mark's face hardened. "You have no proof." Rachel gestured to the shredder. "You're destroying it." A beat. Then Mark moved. Not toward the door, toward Rachel. His shoulder clipped hers hard enough to knock her back into the doorframe. Pain flared down her arm. The documents jammed the shredder with a harsh grind. Rachel reacted without thinking. She hooked her foot behind his ankle and shoved. Mark went down, breath whooshing out of him as he hit the floor. Security flooded in seconds later. Mark lay there, stunned eyes wild with disbelief. Rachel stood over him, chest rising and falling, badge swinging slightly. He attempted to obstruct an internal investigation, she said calmly. And then he attempted to leave. The security chief nodded. "Cuff him." As Mark was hauled to his feet, he leaned toward Rachel, voice low and venomous. "You think this ends with me?" Rachel met his gaze. "No, I think it starts with you." By 1:45, the building buzzed. Rumors moved faster than elevators. Phones rang without being answered. Emails went unsent. Daniel stood with Margaret Collins in a glass-walled office overlooking the atrium. "They're unraveling," Margaret said. "Ellison's panic confirms coordination." Daniel watched the crowd below, people circling like schools of fish, sensing a predator. Who's left? Margaret checked her notes. 2. Both legal adjacent, both careful. Daniel's earpiece chimed. Rachel again. "They're watching me now." "I know," Daniel said. "I can feel it." Rachel's voice dropped. "They won't move while invisible." Daniel understood immediately. "You want to disappear?" "Yes?" Margaret frowned. "Absolutely not." Rachel spoke softly. "You said let them think they're ahead." Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. "Then do it, but not alone." Rachel moved back into the service corridors, changing direction twice, stepping into the rhythms she knew better than anyone. She swapped her jacket with a cleaner she trusted clipped on a different badge, pulled her hair loose. In minutes, she was who she had been for years. Unremarkable, unnoticed. From the shadows, she watched the watchers. At 3:10, 2 men entered the archival room together, one legal, one compliance. They moved quickly, speaking in low voices, confidence returning now that they believed the threat had shifted. Rachel slipped into position, phone left behind recorder running on a secured line she had been issued an hour earlier. "We don't have time," one said. Ellison cracked. "He won't talk," the other replied. "He's loyal. Loyalty doesn't survive prison." Silence. "Then we need to burn the backups." Rachel's breath slowed. "Tonight," the first man said, "before Mercer locks everything down." Rachel stepped back, heart steady, mind already moving. She signaled once. Security moved. By 4:30, both men were detained. By 5, the board was convening under emergency provisions. By 6, Daniel Mercer stood at the head of the long table, voice carrying without effort. "This company mistook silence for compliance," he said. It mistook invisibility for consent. Eyes shifted. Throats tightened. Daniel continued, "That ends today." Rachel watched from the back of the room, unseen again, but different now. The power in the space had changed. Not because a CEO spoke, but because the truth had found a voice. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Hartwell Plaza exhaled finally deeply, knowing something irreversible had happened. And Rachel Adams, once invisible, stood exactly where she needed to be, as the system she had survived for years finally began to answer for itself. The boardroom smelled like cold coffee and restraint. Rachel Adams stood at the back of the room, hands loosely clasped, spine straight, eyes scanning faces that had never once scanned her. 12 board members, old money, new power, men and women who had learned to sit very still while deciding other people's futures. Daniel Mercer stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared. Voice measured every word placed with intent. "This meeting is not about damage control," he said. "It's about accountability." A murmur rippled. Not disagreement, calculation. One of the older board members leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Daniel, we appreciate your decisiveness, but this situation has escalated quickly." Daniel didn't blink. It escalated slowly. "You just weren't looking." Rachel felt the weight of that land. She saw a woman near the window press her lips together, eyes narrowing. She saw another man glance at his phone and then think better of it. Margaret Collins sat 2 seats down from Daniel legal pad, open pen still. She didn't speak unless invited. She didn't need to. Daniel continued, "We have documented retaliation, obstruction of internal audits, unauthorized access to compliance archives, and attempted destruction of records. 3 detentions, 1 executive on administrative leave, 1 hospitalized." A pause. "This is not optics. This is structure." A man with a silver watch cleared his throat. "You're asking us to accept testimony from a custodial employee as central evidence." Rachel felt the room tilt, not outward, inward, toward her. Daniel turned slightly, his hand open in her direction, without touching. "Asking you to accept facts documented by a professional who happened to be employed in custodial operations." The silver watch frowned. "Optics still matter." Rachel spoke before Daniel could. Her voice was calm, even. "Optics didn't matter when I was about to be terminated without cause." Several heads turned sharply. Daniel did not interrupt her. Rachel took a breath. Optics didn't matter when an analyst undergoing chemotherapy was buried in procedural delay. Optics didn't matter when compliance logs were scrubbed and audits were stalled. Optics mattered only when the silence broke. The room went still. A woman at the far end spoke, tone cool. "And you believe yourself uniquely positioned to expose this." Rachel met her gaze. "I was positioned where no one thought power existed." The woman studied her. Something softened. Not sympathy. Recognition. Daniel resumed, "I'm invoking emergency governance. Effective, immediately operational oversight is restructured. External auditors are engaged. Legal immunity is conditional on full cooperation. The silver watch bristled. "You're overstepping." Daniel's voice hardened. "I'm owning what you avoided." Rachel watched the shift. Not dramatic, incremental. The moment when resistance realized it was already too late. By the time the meeting adjourned, decisions had been made that would ripple outward for months. Careers ended quietly. Investigations began loudly. Statements were drafted and redrafted until truth could survive them. Rachel stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall for a brief second, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Her arm still ached from the earlier scuffle. Her jaw felt tight from holding back words that hadn't yet found a safe place to land. Daniel approached slower now, the edge of command replaced by something more human. "You didn't have to speak." Rachel looked at him. "Yes, I did." He nodded. "They heard you. They heard a problem," she said, "not a person." Daniel didn't argue. Margaret joined them. "We're arranging protective measures. Media interest is building. Internal emails are already leaking." Rachel sighed. "Of course they are." Margaret studied her. "You should consider stepping back." Rachel shook her head. "They'll frame this as ambition if I disappear." Daniel watched her closely. "You're not obligated to carry this." Rachel met his gaze. "I already am." They walked together toward the elevator. The doors opened, and for a moment none of them moved. Daniel spoke quietly. "I need to ask you something, and you can say no." Rachel waited. "Stay on," he said, "not as cover, not as a symbol, as part of the structure that replaces what failed." Rachel considered it. The long nights, the scrutiny, the inevitable attempts to undermine her credibility, the hospital bills waiting on her kitchen counter. "I'll stay," she said, "but not where you want to put me." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Where then?" "Internal risk," Rachel said. "Embedded, rotational, uncomfortable." Margaret smiled thinly. "You'd terrify people." Rachel returned the smile. "Good." The elevator doors closed. They descended in silence, the city sliding upward around them. When Rachel stepped out onto the executive floor, she felt eyes on her again. But this time, the attention was different. Less dismissive, more wary. Her phone vibrated. A message from the hospital. She stepped aside, heart tightening, and answered. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm here." A pause. Her breath hitched, then steadied. "Thank you for telling me." She ended the call and stood still for a moment, hand pressed flat against her chest. Daniel watched her concern flickering through his control. "My father's number's stabilized," Rachel said. "For now." Daniel nodded. "Am glad." Rachel looked out through the glass at the city below. "This doesn't feel like winning." "No," Daniel said. "It feels like responsibility." They stood there, two figures, separated by history and hierarchy, united by the knowledge that something irreversible had begun. Later that evening, as lights flickered on across the skyline, Rachel returned to the service corridor one last time. She paused where she had stood countless mornings, unseen, unheard, learning the shape of a system by the way it ignored her. She touched the wall lightly, not in farewell, in acknowledgement. When she turned back toward the elevators, her reflection in the glass looked the same, but the building no longer did, and neither did the rules that governed it. The first subpoena arrived before sunrise. Rachel Adams was standing in her kitchen, one hand wrapped around a mug of reheated coffee, when her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with Margaret Collins' name. That alone told her enough. "They've moved faster than expected," Margaret said without preamble. "Former vendors. 2 shell consultancies. They're claiming breach of contract and wrongful interference." Rachel leaned her hip against the counter eyes, drifting to the pill organizer beside the sink, the one she filled every Sunday night for her father, so they're not denying it. No, Margaret replied. They're reframing it. Rachel closed her eyes. Of course they are. By 8 in the morning, cable news vans were lining the street outside Hartwell Plaza. Cameramen adjusted lenses. Reporters rehearsed phrases that balanced outrage with caution. Inside the building, emails flooded inboxes with subject lines that screamed concern while saying nothing. Daniel Mercer stood in his office, watching the feeds on mute. The city moved beyond the glass, indifferent and relentless. When Rachel entered, he didn't turn right away. They're calling this a leadership crisis, he said, not a corruption case. Rachel set her bag down. That's intentional. They're positioning Elliot Vaughn as a lone actor. Daniel continued, an anomaly. Rachel nodded. Dead men make convenient villains. Daniel finally faced her. You're going to be attacked. I already am, Rachel said. They're just changing the angle. Margaret joined them, dropping a folder on the desk. They've requested depositions, including yours. Rachel didn't flinch. When? Tomorrow morning. Daniel swore under his breath. That's aggressive. They want her off balance, Margaret said. Exhausted. Emotional. Rachel straightened. Then we don't give them that. The deposition room was smaller than Rachel expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. A long table scarred by years of elbows and legal posturing. 3 attorneys sat across from her, all expensive, all polite in the way that meant nothing. The lead counsel smiled. Ms. Adams, thank you for your time. Rachel folded her hands. I don't have a choice. The man chuckled lightly. Everyone has a choice. Rachel didn't respond. They began gently. Background, employment history, reasons for leaving her previous role. She answered carefully, truthfully, without embellishment. Then the tone shifted. You claim you overheard conversations regarding audit manipulation, the attorney said, yet you have no recordings. No, Rachel replied. I have notes written by you, he pressed, without witnesses. Rachel met his gaze. I was the witness. Another attorney leaned in. You were under significant personal stress at the time, correct? A sick parent, financial pressure, yes. So you were vulnerable. Rachel's voice stayed level. I was observant. The lead counsel smiled again, thinner this time. You were a janitor. Rachel felt the word land like a deliberate shove. She waited a beat. Then I was an employee with access. The attorneys exchanged a glance, and now the lead counsel continued. You've been reassigned, elevated. One might argue you benefited. Rachel leaned forward slightly. If you think access to scrutiny, surveillance, and public attack is a benefit, you're welcome to it. Silence. The deposition dragged on, questions looping, attempts to confuse timelines, to provoke emotion. Rachel answered steadily, grounding herself in the physical, the feel of the chair, the sound of her breath, the memory of long nights where panic only made things worse. When it ended, she stood slowly, her back stiff, her head clear. Outside the room, Daniel waited. How bad, he asked. They tried to make me small, Rachel said. It didn't work. Daniel nodded. It never does with you. By afternoon, the attacks escalated. Anonymous tips leaked to blogs. Old photos surfaced. A story about Rachel's previous employer framed as instability rather than sacrifice. Rachel scrolled through it once, then shut her phone off. They're building a character, she said to Daniel. Not a case. Margaret nodded. Classic. Daniel's jaw tightened. We can counter. Rachel shook her head. Not yet. Daniel looked at her sharply. Why? Because the louder we get, the more they frame this as a war between power players, Rachel said. And am not supposed to look like one. Margaret studied her. You're suggesting silence. I'm suggesting patience, Rachel replied. Let them overreach. That night, Rachel sat beside her father's bed in the hospital, the machines humming softly around them. He slept breath shallow but steady. She watched his chest rise and fall, grounding herself in the rhythm. Her phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. You should have stayed invisible. Rachel stared at it. Her thumb hovered, then lowered. She didn't reply. The next morning, the second subpoena arrived. Broader, meaner, fishing. Rachel brought it straight to Margaret. They're desperate, Margaret said, scanning it. Which means someone's afraid. Rachel nodded. Not of prison. Of exposure, Margaret finished. By midday, Daniel received a call that changed everything. Internal affairs from the state is here, his assistant said, voice tight, unannounced. Rachel and Daniel exchanged a look. This isn't ours, Daniel said quietly. No, Rachel agreed. This is bigger. The investigators moved through the building with purpose badges, out questions sharp. They didn't ask for Rachel at first. That worried her more than if they had. Finally, one of them approached her desk. Ms. Adams. She stood. Yes, we'd like to speak with you privately. The room they took her to was different from the deposition room. No posturing, no games. Just two investigators, a recorder, and a file thick with documents. We've been tracking Von Hale systems for 18 months, one of them said. Your information accelerated our timeline. Rachel absorbed that. So this wasn't just internal. No, the investigator replied. This is federal. Rachel felt the weight of it settle, the scale of what she had stepped into. The investigator continued. We need you to understand something. What you did disrupted a network that extended beyond this building. Rachel's voice was quiet, I figured, and that he said puts you at risk. Rachel met his eyes. I already am. When she left the room, Daniel was waiting. This just got larger, he said. Rachel nodded. It always was. As the day wore on, the building buzzed with a different energy now. Not fear. Anticipation. The sense that something long buried was being dragged into the light, whether it wanted to be or not. Rachel stood at the window as dusk fell, watching the city ignite, with lights each one a story, a risk, a truth someone hoped would stay hidden. She thought of the message she'd received, of the years she'd spent making herself invisible to survive. She understood now what it had cost her, and she understood something else too. They weren't trying to silence her anymore. They were trying to stop what came next. And that meant she was exactly where she needed to be. The first arrest did not happen at Hartwell Plaza. It happened 3 miles away, in a quiet parking garage beneath a luxury condominium where the lights were always too bright and the cameras too obvious. By the time the news reached the building, the name was already circulating in whispers, moving faster than any official memo. Elliot Vaughn had talked. Rachel Adams heard it from Daniel Mercer, not from the alerts flooding her phone. He stood in the doorway of the internal risk office, jacket off tie, loosened, something tight and unsettled in his expression. He took a deal, Daniel said. Limited immunity, full cooperation. Rachel absorbed the words without reaction. She had expected this. Men like Vaughn always mistook control for loyalty until fear clarified the difference. What did he give them? She asked. Everything, Daniel replied. Names, accounts, offshore routing, the structure above and below him. Rachel exhaled slowly. Then, this doesn't stay corporate. No, Daniel said. It goes political. Within hours, the building filled with unfamiliar faces. Federal investigators, state regulators, 2 representatives from the Attorney General's office who moved like they owned the floor before being told they didn't. Hallways once reserved for quiet power now echoed with clipped questions and the sound of doors being shut hard. Rachel moved through it all with measured calm. She didn't rush. She didn't explain unless asked. She had learned the danger of filling silence with unnecessary truth. At 11:20, Margaret Collins pulled her aside. "You're being requested again." Rachel nodded. "By who?" Margaret hesitated. "Someone above my clearance." That alone told her enough. The room they brought her to was smaller than the last. No windows, no visible cameras. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a man in a dark suit who stood when she entered, but did not offer his hand. "Ms. Adams," he said. Agent Thomas Hale." Rachel sat. "You already know who I am." He allowed a thin smile. "We know who you were. We're still deciding who you are now." Rachel met his gaze. "Then ask what you need." Hale studied her for a moment, eyes sharp, evaluating not her words, but the space around them. "You weren't on our radar." Rachel nodded. "I wasn't supposed to be. You didn't initiate contact with us." "No, and yet he continued your information intersects with 3 active investigations." Rachel's pulse stayed steady. Corruption doesn't respect departmental boundaries. Hale's smile faded. It respects opportunity. Rachel leaned back slightly. "Then you should understand why I noticed it." Hale folded his hands. "We do. What we don't understand is why you stayed." Rachel didn't answer right away. She thought of her father's hospital room, of the messages telling her to disappear, of the way systems relied on people believing they had no leverage. Because leaving would have made it someone else's problem, she said. And someone else would have been smaller. Hale watched her carefully. "You're aware that cooperating further will make your life more complicated." Rachel met his eyes. "It already is." He nodded once. "Good. Then we're aligned." When Rachel left the room, she found Daniel waiting in the corridor, tension radiating off him in a way she hadn't seen before. "They're pulling you deeper," he said. Rachel nodded. "They don't have a choice." Daniel lowered his voice. "Neither do you." She looked at him, then really looked at him, not the CEO, not the architect of a system now cracking under its own weight. A man who had built control because chaos once hurt him and was now learning the cost of that strategy. "You didn't plan this," she said. "No," Daniel admitted, "but I'm responsible for it." Rachel paused. "That's not the same thing." Daniel studied her, then nodded. "Teach me the difference." The afternoon brought another twist. An internal email leaked supposedly from Rachel, written in a tone she would never use, implying personal ambition and grievance. It spread fast, screenshots, headlines, the familiar hum of narrative construction. Margaret slammed a printed copy onto the desk. Forgery. Metadata's sloppy. Rachel read it once. They're panicking. Daniel clenched his jaw. "We can disprove it." "Not yet," Rachel said. Margaret frowned. Why let it stand? Because Rachel replied, "They want me angry, defensive, public." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "And you won't give them that." Rachel shook her head. "It'll give them silence." That evening, Rachel returned to the hospital. Her father was awake this time, eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "You look tired," he said. She smiled faintly. "You should see the building." He squeezed her hand, weak but deliberate. "You always notice things other people missed." Rachel swallowed. That didn't always help. He looked at her steadily. "It kept you alive." When she left, night had settled over the city, the streets slick with rain. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. No number. "We know who you really are." Rachel stopped walking. The city noise pressed in around her. Cars hissed past. Somewhere a siren wailed. She typed a response, then erased it. At Hartwell Plaza, lights burned late into the night. Investigators worked. Lawyers argued. Systems strained under the weight of scrutiny. In his office, Daniel Mercer stood alone, staring at the city. He replayed conversations, decisions. The moment he realized control was not protection. He picked up his phone and typed a single message to Rachel. "You're not alone." She read it minutes later and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief, not safety, resolve. Because the pressure wasn't easing, it was shifting, and the next move would not come from the people who had built the system. It would come from the one they never saw coming. The pressure broke at 9:17 in the morning. Rachel Adams was standing in the internal risk office, reviewing a timeline she had memorized 3 different ways when the building's fire alarms triggered without warning. Not the shrill scream of an emergency. The controlled pulsing alert that meant protocol, not panic. She froze for half a second. Then she moved. "False," she said into her headset. "Too clean. Too timed." Daniel Mercer's voice came back immediately low and sharp. "Where?" "South stairwell," Rachel replied. "Levels 28 through 32. Daniel didn't ask how she knew. He trusted the pattern. Rachel exited the office and took the service corridor, not the elevators. The building smelled different now, faintly acrid, like overheated wiring. The alarms continued their steady pulse, ushering people out in orderly lines, creating noise and distraction without real danger. Cover. At level 30, she stopped short. The door to the data governance suite was ajar. It should not have been. Rachel slipped inside. The room was dim server lights, blinking in precise rhythms. 2 figures stood near the main console backs, turned hands moving fast. One wore a security contractor badge. The other did not. Rachel recognized him instantly. Thomas Klein, outside counsel. Quiet, untouchable. The kind of man whose name never appeared on org charts and never needed to. She stepped closer, her foot brushing a loose cable. Klein turned. For a split second, surprise crossed his face. Then annoyance. Then something harder. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Rachel didn't raise her voice. "You triggered the alarm." Klein smiled thinly. Necessary distraction. The contractor glanced between them. "Sir, we're on a clock." Rachel looked at the console. "You're wiping redundancy links." Klein shrugged. "You're smarter than you look." Rachel felt the old anger stir. She buried it. "You're too late." Klein's eyes flicked to the screen. His fingers paused. "No, we're right on time." Rachel pressed her earpiece once. "Daniel." "I see it," Daniel said. "Stay where you are." Klein laughed softly. "He won't reach you in time." Rachel met his gaze. "You always assume the threat comes from above." Klein's smile faltered. Rachel reached into her pocket and placed a small device on the table. A simple black square, unremarkable. Klein's eyes widened. "What is that?" "An external recorder," Rachel said. "Hardwired. Independent power." The contractor swore. Sir Rachel continued calmly. "You initiated a false alarm to access restricted systems during evacuation. You're attempting to destroy evidence tied to a federal investigation." Klein straightened. "You have no authority." Rachel took a breath. "No, but they do." The door burst open. Security flooded the room, weapons lowered, but ready. Behind them, Daniel Mercer stepped in, his expression unreadable. The last fragments of doubt finally gone. Klein's composure collapsed. "This is a misunderstanding." Daniel's voice was cold. "It's over." As they cuffed Klein, Rachel felt the tension release from her shoulders in a rush that left her lightheaded. She leaned against the console, steadying herself. Daniel approached. "You all right?" She nodded. They tried to erase the spine of the case. Daniel glanced at the screen and failed. The alarms shut off. Normalcy attempted to return, but the building knew better. By noon, the arrest was public, not leaked, announced carefully, deliberately. The narrative shifted in real-time headlines, rewriting themselves as facts replaced speculation. Rachel sat in a quiet room with Margaret Collins, answering final questions, her voice hoarse but steady. When it ended, Margaret closed her notebook and looked at her differently now. "You dismantled a shield people thought was permanent," Margaret said. Rachel shrugged. "It was built on silence." Daniel waited for her outside. They stood together by the window, watching the city churn. Traffic, people, lives unaffected by the small earthquake that had just passed through one tower of glass. "This is the end," Daniel said. Rachel shook her head. "It's the reveal." Daniel smiled faintly. "You've changed how I see power." Rachel looked at him. "Power doesn't like being seen." Daniel nodded. "Neither did you." She considered that. "I didn't like being erased." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Earned. Rachel's phone vibrated. A message from Agent Hale. "We're done here. You won't hear from us again." She stared at the screen for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into her pocket. Daniel spoke quietly. "What happens now?" Rachel thought of her father, of the building, of the systems that would rebuild themselves with new faces if left alone. "I stay," she said. "For a while." Daniel nodded. "You'll have enemies." Rachel met his gaze. "I already do." He smiled this time without armor. "Then you'll need allies." Rachel returned the smile, small but real. "I'll choose them carefully." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Hartwell Plaza, Rachel stood where she had once been invisible and watched the world adjust around her. The system had revealed its true face, and it had found too late that the person it tried to erase had been watching all along. The building felt lighter the morning after the arrest, as if something dense had been pulled out of its walls. Rachel Adams arrived before sunrise, not because she had to, but because old habits didn't vanish, just because power shifted. The lobby lights were dim. The marble floor still held the faint chill of night. She paused near the entrance, listening to the hum of systems recalibrating the quiet confidence of a place relearning how to exist without rot holding it together. People greeted her now, not loudly, not performatively. Small nods, measured respect. Some avoided her eyes, entirely unsure which version of her they were allowed to acknowledge. She didn't correct them. Letting people adjust at their own pace felt like mercy. On the executive floor, Daniel Mercer stood by the window hands in his pockets, jacket unbuttoned, looking less like a man guarding a fortress, and more like one taking stock of what remained after the walls came down. "They're issuing the final statement at noon," he said when she approached. "No spin, just facts." Rachel nodded. "Good." Daniel turned. The board agreed to the restructuring. "External oversight," Rachel said. "Rotational audits, independent compliance, and an internal risk unit with teeth," Daniel added. "Yours." Rachel exhaled slowly. "For now." Daniel studied her. "You don't plan to stay forever?" "No," she said. "Systems should survive people." He smiled faintly. "That might be the most dangerous thing you've said." Rachel shrugged. "It's also the truest." They stood in silence for a moment, the city stretching out below them indifferent and alive. Somewhere far beneath a bus hissed to a stop. Somewhere else, a phone rang with news that would change a life in a way no headline could capture. Her phone buzzed. Hospital. Rachel stepped aside to answer, heart tightening out of habit. Yes. She listened, her shoulders slowly easing. Thank you, she said softly. I'll be there later. She ended the call and leaned against the glass, eyes closing briefly. Daniel watched her carefully. Your father, has stable Rachel said. For now. Daniel nodded. If there's anything, Rachel raised a hand gently. You've done enough. He accepted that. By mid-morning, the building was full again. Employees returned. Laptops opened. Work resumed, cautious but real. The statement went live. Names were named. Actions outlined. No hero narrative. No scapegoat beyond the truth. Rachel watched the reactions ripple through the floors. Shock, relief, fear, something close to hope. Margaret Collins joined her near the atrium. The Attorney General's office is satisfied, she said. Charges will proceed. Rachel nodded. Good. Margaret hesitated. You changed things here. Rachel met her gaze. I didn't do it alone. Margaret smiled slightly. No, but you made it unavoidable. As noon passed, Rachel returned to the service corridor one last time, standing where she had stood countless mornings, invisible and unarmed, except with attention. She remembered the sound of voices carried through walls, the careful way she'd learned to listen without being heard. That version of her didn't disappear. It integrated. Daniel found her there. I figured you'd come back. She smiled faintly. I needed to. He leaned against the opposite wall. You know they'll write books about this. Rachel shook her head. They'll get it wrong. Daniel laughed quietly. Probably. They walked back toward the elevators together, not side by side like equals, not ahead or behind, just two people sharing a direction for a few quiet seconds. As the doors closed, Daniel spoke. You were afraid of being seen. Rachel considered it. I was afraid of being misjudged. And now, she said, I trust myself enough not to disappear. The elevator opened onto the lobby. Light poured in. The city waited. Rachel stepped forward, shoulders squared, pace unhurried. She was not smaller for what she'd endured. She was calibrated. Hartwell Plaza would move on. Systems always did. New risks would emerge. New people would test boundaries. That was inevitable. What wasn't inevitable was silence. Rachel walked through the doors and into the day, carrying with her the quiet understanding that power was never just about who spoke the loudest, but about who noticed who stayed and who refused to look away when it mattered most. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that quiet people can carry real power, and unseen choices can change entire systems, take a moment to like this story, subscribe for more, and comment 3 words that resonate with you. I was watching